Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 340, and today's guest is Steph Johnson, co-founder and CEO at Multiplayer. Steph is an inspiration. As discussed in this interview, her background might not be the prototypical tech CEO profile for a few reasons. First, she came up through the agency world and then ran comms in-house for major tech companies like DigitalOcean and MongoDB. Second, she's a female founder of a DevTools platform startup, and yes, we need more female founders. And third, she has a neurological condition called Tourette Syndrome. All of these factors have ultimately given her unique skills to thrive in her current role. Multiplayer is a visual collaboration platform that makes it easy for engineering teams to design, develop, and manage distributed software. The company is venture-backed and on a mission to create better ways for developers to work. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Steph's background story and how she got her career started with agencies in New York City, her decision to move in-house to run comms at DigitalOcean and MongoDB, plus what she learned at each company, like the importance of a developer community, advice for making the shift from agency to in-house roles, founding Multiplayer with Tom Johnson, her co-founder, CTO, and husband, and why being married was a strategic advantage when they raised capital, the details on the Multiplayer platform and its beta release, advice on the storytelling element for a company building technical products, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. I'm not sure if you caught this yet, but VentureFizz launched a new invite-only initiative called VentureFizz Communities. It connects people in specific job functions with the opportunity to grow their network, learn from each other, have access to a centralized library of resources, job opportunities, events, and more. The first community that we are building is focused on product managers in the Boston tech scene. So if you fit the bill, go to venturefizz.com/communities to request an invite. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Steph. Steph, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'm excited to talk to you. We've got so much to cover. Your professional background, your experience running comms for major tech companies, and now as a co-founder and CEO of a company, there's so much to really discuss here. So I'm excited. I did notice that you recently published a blog post that I thought would be perfect for setting kind of the foundation here. So you're CEO and co-founder of a company called Multiplayer, which is in the DevTools world. And
Correct.
your blog post was titled 4 Lessons Every CEO Should Keep in Mind When Starting a DevTools Company. So you're not the traditional background that I normally see for a DevTools startup co-founder CEO. So I thought that was a perfect segue into, talking about what you've done. So what are those 4 lessons?
Oh gosh, love it. Yes, I mean, I talk about 4 lessons, but I guess, there are some other personal identifiers that are kind of interesting. I am a woman, which unfortunately is still a smaller category of CEO-ship. I am married to our co-founder, another little bit of a differentiator there. I'm also a Touretteer. I have Tourette Syndrome. And I think in tech, semi-recently, a lot of CEOs have talked about being on the autism spectrum. And I think neurodiversity is a little more en vogue, for lack of a better term now. So it's not as weird as it would have been 30 years ago. But it's another thing that makes me very different, but I think has given me some unexpected skills that make me good at this role. So starting with that one, I think vulnerability is so important. And when you think about getting the most out of your teams, when they're comfortable and they feel psychologically safe, and they feel like you care about them, they're going to do better work and be more comfortable. So leading with what I sometimes call the grand dame of all the neurological disorders, something so kind of strange and interesting, then they feel comfortable coming to me and saying, you know what, I have Hashimoto's and I need to take time out to eat. And I'm actually trying to lose weight because I'm doing this and I'm going to need to take this Peloton class. And I don't want the team to think that I'm lazy so just all these kind of disclosures about the human condition and the body and your side pursuits and your family and your health. If you don't have to hide that from your employer, you then feel comfortable. And I think you do better work. That doesn't mean we're all sitting around in a coffee klatch talking about, I got a broken leg and I have diabetes, but, just giving people permission to be like, yo, you live in a human body. You probably have some stuff. It's okay to bring that to work and search out accommodations to make the whole you do your best stuff while you're at this job.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I do appreciate how the world has advanced. I'm sure there's lots of room for improvement, but the world has advanced as it relates to being more understanding and compassionate. Mental health, I mean, that's the thing that used to be so just, you don't talk about it, but now talk about it. And the generation now is very open about talking about it. And I just think that's such forward progress.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I'm very interested in is mental health. And I worked with the suicide prevention hotline here in New York for years and years. And it is the high instance of depression or suicidal feelings among CEOs, and how that has a completely different impact than, say, diabetes or cancer. And you will have a board that will discuss, the mental abilities of a CEO with concern. They're not sitting around at a board meeting discussing your diabetes. So the whole mental health thing gets a much different lens than something that's more of a physical process. And I also am really interested in breaking that stigma, because I think it's unfair to be more forgiving of something that attacks you physically versus something that's going on in your mind.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about your background. So, like, where did you grow up, childhood, like all the details.
Yes. My dad was a Presbyterian minister, but he was a beer drinking, same gender marrying liberal. This is interesting because my grandfather was an evangelical minister who was actually saved by the Traveling Jesus show when he was 14 in Pittsburgh. And my mother's father was also a minister. So, like, a lot of holiness going on. I was born in Bridgehampton, which is on Long Island, which is now known as a very fancy, expensive resort area. Back then it was potato fields and it was artists and farmers. And my dad would have drinks with Truman Capote and, hang out with all these really awesome Tennessee Williams, like just really cool artists of the day. Then Jesus called my dad to Detroit. And my mom lost her mind because my mother is very fancy. And she's like, I thought Jesus said Boca Raton. Like, she was not into it. And dad's like, no, I've been called to Detroit. So I grew up in Detroit. And I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek. I'm not super religious, but it did play a part in where I lived and how I grew up. So I grew up in the Motor City. And I dug it. It was a really cool place to grow up as a kid. I had a good life. It gets a terrible rap right now as a city. But I think it's on the upswing, but really liked it there.
And then what brought you to Florida to study, University of Florida?
I was at Michigan State, and I was studying radio, television, and film. I thought I wanted to be an anchor woman. And about 2 years into school, I dropped out and I just wasn't fully baked. And I think, what's the exact age that you go off to college? 18-ish. Some
Mhm.
18-year-olds are like, I'm moving to Finland. I don't need you anymore. Thanks for the upbringing, moving on with my life. And others aren't fully baked yet. So I was not ready to be on my own at that age. And I had stopped taking classes and was actually waitressing at a Bob's Big Boy, and people from the Midwest will know this as the home of the Slim Jim. It's kind of a goofy sort of diner type situation. And somehow my father had a feeling that I was up to something, and he had moved to Florida. He drove up and got me and said, put your stuff in the car. We're going down to Florida. So we get there, and University of Florida has an excellent journalism and communication school. And I tell this story with a lot of humility and gratitude because I know this is an atypical scenario that I should be grateful for. But the joke is that dad kind of approached the head of the journalism school and said, hey, I've got this daughter and she dropped out of Michigan State. I'd like you to take her in. And he's like, but we're actually a top 5 journalism program in the nation and we're very competitive. Why would I do that for you? And he's like, well, joke, joke. Do you want to get into heaven? So I got into the school. And again, it's not a cool story. In 94, it was cute. Now it's borderline, but I feel like I didn't take a spot from someone who deserved it because I got 4.0s. I was born to go into communications. I found my niche. I blossomed. I was fine being on my own. And then I went right to New York to start my career from that.
All right, so let's segue into that. So how'd you get your career started and what did that journey look like?
Oh, that was interesting. My first boss had a habit of inserting me into situations that were not appropriate for my age and station in life. So for example, she would have a keynote opportunity at an industry event and last minute be like, I'm not going, you do it. And I'm like 20, I'm fresh out of college from the Midwest, naive. What are you talking about? You have a night to memorize my speech. And I didn't know that you could push back, talk back, argue. I'm just in New York City, grateful for a job. So I would do it and I'd be fine. Or she would say, we have to run this partner meeting for a white shoe law firm client, and I don't feel like going, so you do it. Unclear whether she was grooming me and trying to give me the greatest gift consciously, or whether she just was being manipulative. I don't know. But the upside is I got experience doing all these crazy things that I would have never been exposed to as a 20-year-old junior account exec at a PR firm.
So right into the fire. And then
Yeah.
obviously you seize the opportunity to obviously take on these roles and speaking opportunities. So how did you pave your way through the agency world?
Wow. I think I've always had a mind that is good at context switching. I think it might be a bit because I have these dopamine neuron Tourette things firing fast in my head. So I'm a pretty fast talker. I'm a pretty fast thinker. And I just relished agency life because you get to spend an hour with Bank of America, and then you're spending an hour with L'Oreal, and then you're spending an hour with, just all the variety and the change and the account management and getting to play with people. At the end of the day, business is cool, but it's the human condition that I'm super interested in, and it's the people that I'm working with. So I've had team members that have followed me from agency to agency, and people find it peculiar the level of detail I have about their lives. But it's not because I'm a nosy weirdo. I just care deeply about your dog and how it's doing and what do you feed it? And do you think you'll have kids someday? And where did you grow up? And I'm endlessly fascinated by other humanoids.
I already always heard of this book, but I never took the time to read it, or I actually listened to books and audiobooks. But How to Win Friends and Influence People,
Sure.
like I listened to that recently, and I was just like, wow, this is what I built my career on. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, wow, you actually actually interested in people and interested in their lives and beyond. Like it just that relationship building. So I've been passing that along to my two daughters, that one's in college and one's soon to be in college. So, but yeah, that's like a trait that is so meaningful for, I think, success. And obviously you're, one of
Yeah.
the people that is a good example. Okay. So how did you end up going in-house? Because, the agency world is, it's a lot of people don't last more than a couple years, never mind the great trajectory that you had. And you're leading these PR firms. And usually that's kind of where you stay, right? But you decided to go in-house in the tech industry. So what prompted that decision?
Yes. So I was just tooling along one day, happy as a clam, at a San Francisco-based agency where I was in the New York office doing financial tech clients. And I was approached by a buddy of mine that said, there's this in-house job. What do you think? And I arrogantly thought that in-house was where old comms ladies went to fail up and die. Like I was like, no way, there's no hustle in it. That's a bad idea. Like I'm gonna get bored. Like what if I break up with the head of sales and then I can't, like if you're having a bad run with L'Oreal, then you just turn around and play with Citibank for an hour, in the agency world. But if it's the same crew, I was like, is it going to keep me interested? Am I going to be good at it? So I was offered an opportunity to be the first communications hire at DigitalOcean, which is a great little cloud, not little anymore, tech company, and another seminal example of building a durable tech business in New York, which I think is kind of cool, like MongoDB and Datadog. Like you don't need the Valley to have a successful durable tech business. So they offer me the job, they hire me, and the money is good. The responsibility is amazing. The mandate is build us this thing. We'll resource you. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of awesome. So I get there and they gave me community managers as my reports. And I'm like, so comms and community are not the same thing. And they're like, well, just work it out. I'm like, all right. So I ended up having these engineers reporting to me. And then for a while, I actually reported through to the CTO instead of a CMO or the CEO. And that was another huge gift moment in my career because it kept me technically grounded. It made me understand the importance of the engineering org and not putting out what sadly in my industry is deemed, fluff and marketing BS and gimmicks. And it really kind of kicked off a period where I understood that I needed to be beholden to this beautiful product and the users, not just like doing press releases and talking to TechCrunch.
I, so where was DigitalOcean the time that you joined? Like, because I mean, this company obviously scaled and they went public,
Yeah.
and so where was the business at when you joined?
2 years pre-going public. I want to say we had 350 people when I got there. So not like
Mhm.
employee number 10 type situation, but pretty early. I believe it was 2017.
And to never have I'm sorry, never have comms is kind of surprising with a company at that stage. Yet I think it's a testament that how important their developer community was because
100%.
yeah, because it wasn't like product-led growth, but it was definitely developer-led growth of, I mean, the community piece that you were running was the bread and butter, I think, of generating revenue, right?
I mean, our tutorials, which I can't take personal responsibility for, we had a wonderful team that did them, was one of the shining stars and something I hear about today. While I was doing my VC rounds, my MongoDB experience is ginormous and wonderful. But a lot of the VCs have been like DigitalOcean, those tutorials, sick content game. What a developer community. More impressed with that even. And I think that, you got to a point where you'd Google an open source project and you'd hit a DO tutorial before you'd even get to the project's page. So what they did was incredible. And that's all we needed. We didn't need a traditional comms or marketing function because we were just explaining our products and concepts that developers cared about to them in a way. And we joke that our target audience is a drunk 5-year-old. So you want to explain something so plain spoken and non-techie fancy that literally a drunk 5-year-old, I'm not advocating that anybody give any of their 5-year-olds liquor, but could understand it and spin up a droplet from reading it.
Very cool. All right. So what brought you to MongoDB?
So 2 years into DigitalOcean, loving it. I had a director title. MongoDB approached me, and this was 2019-ish because I spent almost 4 years there. And they wanted a VP comms, and it was a direct report to the CEO, David Acheria. And I was like, this just bigger opportunity, big step up. I knew the database space pretty well. I had a really interesting, in my consulting days, database company that followed me from firm to firm called KX Systems. And this was a very specific, heavy financial tech. Like if you're doing high-speed algo trading and arbitrage, you would use a database like KX's. So not a multi-purpose, but the fastest thing on the market for years. So I understood the space and I was like, oh, I could do this. This is interesting. Did a lot of interviews. Got there and they handed me a team of 4 and it was a traditional communications role. And by the time I left, I had a team of 18 and I was doing everything from media to analyst to customer success stories. So I was able to reach my hand up, say, I think I can do that, put it in my org, run it. We had CMOs on and off for my tenure, but a lot of the time I reported directly to Dave. And that was super appealing to me because a CEO that understands that comms is a corner office priority and not just a marketing function is a dream. So to be able to work directly with him was incredible.
Because I did have that assumption that that's uncommon, right? It's usually reports into the CMO, comms, and demand gen, and all the other elements
Yeah,
of running a marketing function.
yeah. It was cool.
So,
I mean, I saw bonkers growth while I was there. I was there through the entire COVID process. I remember our first conference call. There were 5 of us on the phone on a Saturday for a 20-minute chat that turned into 4 hours. What is this? What do we do? Just like the pace of which we had to communicate to the company during COVID, like any company, was just staggering and challenging and also rewarding because I think we did it well. So I learned a lot from that.
so what advice would you have for folks that are in the comms world, maybe considering moving in-house? Like, what did you learn from agency to in-house that would be helpful for other people trying to make the same leap?
Hmm. I'm not sure if there's specific stuff I would tell you to do or learn. I think a lot of it is your type of person and personality and style. Um, that doesn't sound super inspiring or helpful to someone that might want to make the switch. I guess I'd say you have to uh, you have to be okay with consistency. You have to be comfortable that you may be focused on a monster project for a period of time with the same people. So I guess you've got to have some equanimity. You've got to have some stick-to-itiveness. You've got to have some diplomacy. I really feel like I had to rein in my personal tendencies to be dramatic and mouthy, for lack of a better word, when I went in-house, because I had to think more about how I'd be seeing these people again in a month or a year, as opposed to just, clients coming and going in the agency world.
Got it. Okay. All right. So let's talk about multiplayer. So the company that you and, as you mentioned before, your husband have
Yep.
co-founded. Like, what's the background story? How did this come to fruition?
So about 4 years into MongoDB, started thinking about what I wanted to do next. I feel like reporting to Dave was like getting a free MBA. I just having that role in that company. I don't say this with arrogance, but I saw so many things and learned so many things and got to work on so many things with so many smart people. I felt like maybe I could do this for myself. So I left. And the week after I left, the market tanked, like literally 4 days later. So I was telling my husband, all right, I'm going to leave MongoDB. Now's the time. I'm going to do something. We've got about 6 to 9 months of cash in the bank. I can take my time. And then 5 days later, I'm like, hey, guess what? We've got 6 to 8 weeks of cash in the bank. I got to figure out what I need to do. And I had invested in some, what my husband likes to call high loss SaaS instead of high growth SaaS. I won't name names, but I didn't have years to fool around and think about my next move. So I'm evaluating my options, and he's like, what about one of my crazy ideas? And I was like, oh, okay. Is it the robots or the painting machine? Because my husband is one of those guys that always has some crazy project. He's got an AI and neural networks background. He also builds humanoid robots that you can control through your iPhone, like hardware guy, software guy, Renaissance man.
Because he started
Um,
out in speech. I noticed like speech
Started out in
recognition
speech
in
and
Cambridge,
nuance.
Massachusetts. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And he grew up in Andover, actually. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So he's like, no, sadly, it's not the robots or the painting machine. It's something called Protocolor. And I'm like, oh, that's the dull one. He's like, no, let me explain it to you. I'm like, fine. So then he told me about it, and I'm like, interesting, but let me, take it on the road and talk to some independent software nerds that I know, so I'm not taking your word for it. And everybody was crazy for it. And I was like, wow, there might be something here. And then we decided to fundraise in the stinkiest fundraising climate since the beginning of man, probably except for 2009. And we actually were able to get a first fund called Bowery Capital here in New York City to take a leap on us and give us a seed round. And then we were able to bring on some more investors and started building the dream literally Jan 1 of 2023, because I think our first cash came in on New Year's Eve. So we were like, break out the champagne because this timing is perfect.
And if my research is correct, this your husband had this idea percolating for like 10 years or something. Like this is something
He
that
he
so,
has sketches that are a decade old. And he was solving his own problem because as a backend software engineer, he's at companies like Citrix, and he's struggling with communicating with other people on the team that are trying to collaborate on distributed software. So if you think about, say you're the New York team that decides you want to build a new feature, and there are only 10 of you in the room, nobody else is in time zone, you make a lot of decisions. Where do you put it? Some people like to write things down in Google Docs. Other people love a whiteboard that gets erased or it's obsolete the moment that you put it up. So this gives you a place to connect your code repos, your SaaS tools, your developer tools, anything that you're working on in distributed software, put it in one platform so you can communicate and collaborate. So there's no, oh, I can't find any documentation here, or this team got let go and I don't know what was in their head, or the DevOps guy was on vacation, but I couldn't reach him, so I can't fill him in. So it's a stall point. It makes everything so much faster and more productive if you're dealing with a distributed software platform.
So when you went to investors, like this is always what I love about this podcast, because it's like, how is this entrepreneur or co-founders uniquely qualified to solve this problem that someone's been thinking about for 10 years, that's been living and breathing it and knows like this is what needs to happen. Like that, as an investor on the other side, I would just be like totally leaning in like this,
Yeah.
this is what I'm looking for. So
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that the husband-wife thing, we thought a lot about that.
Mhm.
And mostly people were very excited about it from a funding standpoint because they felt it de-risked us because we've had 20 years to figure out how to communicate. And we didn't just spend, no offense to founders that have this scenario and make it successful, but we didn't meet at Facebook, work together for 6 months, and we're 23, and we decide that we can build a durable business. Again, many of those success stories, not throwing shade, but we were a little less risky because of our history and because of the market we were pitching in. And the fact that we were GTM and tech together was also really interesting to them because a lot of companies were frustrated with two tech co-founders. And they're like, we're going to have to explain the GTM, and we're going to help them have to hire marketing, and they're going to need comms and PR and all these things. So we had a really perfect blend of expertise together.
well, you brought up an interesting point that it didn't even dawn on me. So yeah, you talked about, yeah, there's co-founders that come together and there's all these great success stories, but there are many more unsuccessful stories. That's the number one reason why startups fail, other than maybe cash, but it's co-founders that aren't seeing the same vision or getting along. Like there's all these, stories that it just doesn't work out. So that's
Yeah.
so interesting as far as, the viewpoint of a married couple for as long as you were or still are. So the division of responsibilities was very clear too. Like it was like, you're the
Oh,
go-to-market engineering, like it was very clear.
it's kind of amazing. Like he wants to do nothing that's on my daily to-do list, and same. Like it is heavenly because
Mhm.
there's no loggerheads about a tech decision. Like he knows his stuff, he knows what he's going to do. I know my go-to-market side. I'm fortunate because I have an incredible community director. And a lot of my peers at the seed level don't get to hire that until their A round. But it was so pivotal to building a dev tool company, thinking about the community and figuring out how to build it, that I made this incredible hire. And the woman was at MongoDB with me, but we didn't know each other. But she was doing more the kind of higher end customer success. And then she built the community at Prisma from the ground up. So she has the I can deal with Bank of America if they're ever yelling at us, and also the hey, I can do the scrappy build it from the ground up to developers. So that helps a lot on my side.
So where's the product now? I think you released in beta. Like what's the latest with the
We
platform?
released a beta, very exciting, in February. We've got several hundred users that are using the product, saying great things. It's a blessing that their complaints have miraculously led us to what we were actually also planning on doing next. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Right now, it's a wonderful tool for collaborating and communicating across your team. You can branch code, you can do design reviews, you can do anything you want, but it's still a manual process. You have to put things into our tool. You have to manually update your stuff. Our observability functionality, which we're announcing next month, fingers crossed, is going to use open telemetry to collect distributed traces from your system architecture. So you never have to worry about incorrect API documentation. You don't have any manual headaches to create documentation. You can let your running system be your actual system of record and your source of truth. And that's what people have wanted from the beta is I love that I can put all this together and collaborate, but boy, would it be great if I got out of this laborious manual documentation.
That's amazing.
It's cool.
So your go-to-market strategy. So you talked about the community manager that you already have. So is that kind of how you're going to build up more of that developer community approach, like we talked about with DigitalOcean?
Yep, yep. We call ourselves product-led sales. I guess it's the new term hybrid of product-led growth and founder-led sales. So I have a lot of fintech contacts, and Thomas, our CTO, has a lot of insurtech contacts. So we are going to be going over after that market. And then we're also building the community, and we're already producing a tremendous amount of great content around system architecture, architectural debt, observability, all the things that we know developers struggle with and want to learn more about. Some people have told me you can't do both, but I think it's crucial because as a founder that only has a seed, I have to be doing founder-led sales and bringing in some bigger business. But as a dev tool person who has developers at the core, I need to build a killer community that loves us and likes what we're doing and who we listen to help evolve the product.
All right, so you mentioned this before. The name originally was Protocaller.
Yep.
How did you evolve to multiplayer, which I think is a perfect name for this?
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. Protocaller was great. We both loved it. It did not have an E between the L and the R, so it was protocol with an R. And Mitch Weiner, who was my boss at DigitalOcean, one of the co-founders of DO and a current investor, was like, dudes, that's not a name. We're like, why? It's perfect. It makes sense. He's like, yo, you need a swing for the fences name that you can market the heck out of. We're like, fine. So he presented a couple of ideas. And we were like, multiplayer. And it's not just a fanciful, like general marketing term that we think we can market the heck out of. It's actually the core functionality at the base of our entire platform. So it's our number one descriptor. So we just embraced it.
All right, and you talked about the fundraising, the time frame that you close was, I mean, it's been rough for a long
Yeah.
time now. So talk about how you approach that, because from what I gathered, you leverage connections that help make the introduction. So I just want this to be kind of like hey, I'm first time raising capital. What did you do in a very challenging market to ultimately close the round?
Yes. I need to tell this anecdote without being disparaging to anybody who didn't end up being helpful to me, but we would talk to people and they're all like, I can introduce you to 10 friends. And then you follow up after the meeting and they're like, nah, I don't really know them that well, or they don't follow through. And this one guy, Graham Naray, whose company is Oso Software, it's a security platform. He was also Dave's chief of staff at MongoDB. He was like, I'm going to make some intros. And he followed up with me and he's like, here's the 15 people I can get you to. Who do you want? And I was like, you're amazing. And he's just a casual buddy. It's not like, my cousin or my mentor, just a great guy. So he made some intros, and one of them was Bowery Capital, and that started the ball rolling. And I have a funny anecdote about him and just kind of a good illustration of why comms people have a challenging job being spokespeople. I did an interview with CNBC. It was a 50-minute interview. And I said lots of things that I felt were like salient and provocative and technically astute. The one quote the dude pulls for the article is, Graham was so helpful, we should have renamed the company after him.
Oh, I
I
read
was,
that article. Yeah,
I
yep,
was
yep, yep.
joking, and it's a cute comment, and Graham thinks it's funny, and so did the reporter. But I was like, man, you couldn't have captured any of my like super smart, technically astute comments. You had to go with that. But he was really, really helpful.
That's funny. And as part of this round, you have Mitch Weiner from DigitalOcean, one of
Yep.
the
Yep.
co-founders, the founder of Launch Darkly, Edith. So
Yep.
like how did you get people like that involved? Well, Mitch, you probably knew from DigitalOcean, so that goes without saying.
Yeah.
But Edith, like who's just a really successful woman entrepreneur.
Yes. Yeah. So Edith, I followed for years. I mean, she's an incredible role model. And I just approached her and said, please, will you play with us? Like I may have gotten a warm intro from someone, but I was just like, here's why I want you. Here's what I think. The thing about her is when you listen to her in interviews, she cares about the human condition and making the developer's life better. And it's not just, I'm going to build this great product and increase productivity and we'll all make billions of dollars. She talks evocatively about the stress and the sweating and the drama of pushing code that might be buggy and what it does to developers when they're like, oh, I push the code. What's going to happen? What are they going to find? Is it going to be my fault? It's such a stressful thing to do that she has a product that actually helps make that not as stressful. And I just dug that approach so much that I was really grateful to get her on board, and she's been wonderful.
Well, it sounds like you leverage your comms background for the storytelling, right? The story is so important as a
Yeah.
founder to pitch your company to a customer, an investor. It's just so key, or in potential employees. So I think a lot of founders might struggle with that. Like, one, having the guts to reach out to someone like Edith, but one, to captivate our interest. So what advice would you have for that? Like the storytelling for, a dev tool company that it might not be the easiest thing to pitch.
Yeah. It's very, very hard because I do believe an evocative story is going to stick better in someone's head. But when you're selling a technical product, it also has to be relevant, connect with the user, and not feel just like a marketing gimmick. So we rely very heavily on anecdotes that developers are familiar with and the pain that they feel. Like, we talked to one guy in our introductory pitching who works for a giant multinational company who shall remain nameless. And we asked how they keep their architecture up to date. And he said their team meets once a year. They roll out a giant piece of paper that's the size of the wall. They all write down their piece of the architecture and they roll it back up and meet again later. And I'm like, that's obsolete in 30 seconds. And developers are like, yeah, man, I've been in that meeting. So I think it's like telling a story that you can picture and remember, but it's also got to be like a legit representation of what your product's going to do or a problem they know.
And that's a perfect example. Like, that stuck with me. It's like, yeah, I'm like, how is that possible that this multinational corporation
Yeah,
would handle the architecture once a year together on these pieces of paper? It seems absurd, but it totally parlays into someone like leaning in again and then remembering what you do.
yeah,
Yeah, that's all. All right. So what's the size of the team now? What's it like working there? What's the culture like? Because it's, it can be tricky kind of getting
yeah,
a company going, and the employees and the culture.
yeah. We have 10, and I'm super proud that they're in Kurdistan, Armenia, Portugal, Bulgaria, Kyiv, and Italy. So great international team. Thomas, my co-founder, and I are the only ones here in the US, and they are very affordable and very fantastic, and nothing against US developers, but hello, other tech companies. There's fantastic tech talent in other places in the world. Um, One thing that's interesting is most of these team members Thomas has worked with before. So we didn't have that cross your fingers, go with somebody you've never seen before who's in a remote time zone and hope they work out. When I talk to a lot of other co-founders at our stage, they're like, yeah, we're firing the CTO on Thursday. This person's not working out. Like, the volume of HR headaches they have, we have none, because these are no known quantities. They're great people. They've recommended people they know and brought them into the fold. So it's a fantastic team, fully remote. And, we understand people's kids and time zone challenges and holidays and issues. And, DO was fully remote from the beginning when I got there. So I was very used to that from the start. So we have no issue with it. And we're proud of the fully remote culture.
All right, since running multiplayer, what like, first role as a CEO, what have been your biggest lessons learned?
Um, I should have taken more math in school. Um, yeah, I'm not the spreadsheet gal. I'm not the cap table gal. Thankfully, I can admit that vulnerability because my co-founder is a double math and computer science major. So we have it within the family, the company, if not just in my head. I also had no idea that I was also going to be HR, product management, head of marketing, sales, COO, like just all the things. And I am so grateful for my founders groups. There are a couple of great VCs that have informal communities, even if you're not funded by them, where you can just ask the really embarrassing questions. And I took to my group a couple of months ago, and I had a question I was too embarrassed to say to anybody because I didn't want anyone to be like, you dummy, you shouldn't be running a company but I had the rookie mistake of owing the state of Delaware $300,000 for our franchise tax. And that's actually not a thing. It's just the way you calculate it. So I had to go in and recalculate with the state, and it dropped down to 2K and everything worked out. But I'm sitting there not knowing the system of setting up a franchise and dealing with Delaware and seeing $300,000 and figuring out, how do I tell my board? How do I tell my partner? Is this because I like made a math error and now I've lost us 3 months of burn? Like just the kind of little things where, I'm a 52-year-old person who's had a long career and I've seen many things, but there are so many little COO-y aspects of building a startup that have just shocked me at how tedious and confusing they are.
Yeah, I'm laughing because like there's so many things of running a business, no matter what size. You're just like, what? Like, and it's just like mind numbing because you want to focus on building the business, not payroll, right? Where it's just
Yeah,
like, thank God for Gusto. Like I used to have like paychecks and it was just like pull my hair out. I'm like, why am I looking at a report that what like I just do it, right? Just pay
yeah,
my
yeah,
people. And then
yeah.
Gusto like did that. And I'm just like, all the compliance and everything, they just boom, done.
Yeah,
It's just like such a
yeah.
blessing. All right. So, community development, became a very big thing. I don't know, over the past few years, and it still is a big thing. Like companies aspire to have a community, no matter what type of company you are. It could be exercise, it could be DevTools. It's like it doesn't matter. Community is such a key element. So, you have experience building communities with developers. So just what advice would you have for other companies that aspire to do the same?
Oh gosh. You have to remember that it's a circle, not arrows going back and forth, in terms of I give you this and you give me that. So your developer community and you are always pivoting around the same circular experience where you're getting feedback, you're building tools, you're having an event, they're going to an event. Like it's not I'm going to hit you with this newsletter, I'm going to hit you with this article, you're going to give me feedback. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not transactional. You're actually building a group of people that you're going to help with your tool, and you're going to give them other people with the common experience of using your tool or struggling with system architecture documentation, where they can ask questions, get tips and tricks, and you almost sort of step away from it, and you're not always hand out asking them for something or directly marketing at them.
Yeah, and I think that's so key. And I think some companies, it's like just build a community. Just people will engage, right? We'll set up a Slack channel, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just not magically going to happen. It takes a lot of time, effort, energy, and to your point, at this stage of your company, having a community manager, that just shows how much it is meaningful to your company.
100%. Yeah, it's great. And the feedback is invaluable and it's formal and informal. I mean, we'll have embarrassing discussions when something breaks where we'll pull a couple people in and say, look what happened. What is your advice? And I think normally companies have the propensity to hide the bugs or hide what's wrong because they don't want someone to hear about it or a bigger company to not take a leap on them. But I think you also got to really trust your user community and rustle around and get data from them. And they're happy to help, especially at this stage. Like they want to see you succeed because they like the company. We're building things that really help their life. So nobody's been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this feature is in such a state of disarray. You should be embarrassed. Everyone's like, oh man, I have a hack. Yeah, I'll help you. And when you think about early MongoDB, I mean, MongoDB in the very beginning, people would say that they overpromised and underdelivered, they overmarketed and underteched. But you would have these diehard MongoDB zealots that are like, I don't care if they can't do this thing. I have hacked it and here's how. Like just really hardcore fans. And that kind of loyalty can't be purchased or created with a marketing effort. It's got to be a true symbiotic relationship and a desire to give and share and talk. And
Yeah, it's got to be authentic. It's got to, make sense. And it's just not something that's just like a stamp that we need community. And the CEO is just
yeah,
like, where's our community? And it's just got to be part of the fabric of the business. Very much like, from a different lens, like AI, right? Every company's like, oh, what's our AI strategy? And I think some I saw a post on LinkedIn where it was just a video of making a sandwich, and the AI was just sauce, and they were pouring sauce, and then they put meat up, sauce, meat, and it was just like, oh my God, that's such a good analogy of what companies are rushing to create their AI
Yeah.
strategy, where it isn't like maybe necessary, or it's being forced. It's not organic. But I mean, there's obviously lots of use cases where it would be incredible, but it's
Yeah.
gonna evolve. But anyways,
Yeah. I mean, it's the buzzword AI, and the category is interesting to my co-founder because he did study AI and neural nets, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. So seeing it have become what it has, and seeing some tech CEOs just search and replace whatever they were using and just try to say AI 5 times during an earnings call, it's funny to him. But we're building some AI assist functionality where you can actually use it as an expert on your system architecture, and you can actually ask it to create code and help you out. So an example would be, you are a bank and you have a consultancy that's building systems for you, and something goes wrong. You want to debug it, but customer support is in Bulgaria and you need it now. So you can actually access our chatbot, ask it to diagnose, figure out what the problem is, and write some API code for you so you can hook back up. So we're hoping we're using it in meaningful ways and not just saying the word AI.
well, I mean, there's a huge difference, and it's very obvious your use case is very relevant. But I was laughing earlier when you talked about your husband who was involved with AI a long time ago. So last week I had Andy Palmer on the podcast, and same thing where he's like, "This is my third hype cycle of AI. Like this isn't
Yeah,
my
sure.
first rodeo.
Yeah,
Like this is my third like wave of AI." And so
yeah,
so anyways.
it's funny.
All right. So, you talked about Tourette's, right? So, what inspirational advice would you have for, people with neurological disorders, maybe hesitating to, take the leap of entrepreneurship and building a company? Like, what advice would you have?
Gosh, I mean, every opportunity I have to interface with people, I have a serious thought about whether I'm going to bring it up, how much of it should I show, because I have, as you can see, a modicum of control over it. A lot of people, like there is a kind of Tourette's that's less common where you yell out obscenities. I do not struggle with that. And I can sit through a business meeting and not Tourette at all. I actually gave a speech about neurodiversity in the workplace, and one uh, mentor in my network said, "You didn't Tourette enough." And I was like, "What the heck does that mean?" Like what? So it's complicated for me. I tend to find a way to bring it up pretty early on, not in a let's dwell on this for 10 minutes way, but in case anybody thinks that there's something more wrong with me. Or I had an old boss tell me that he thought that I looked insecure about my work product and nervous. So maybe we should put a press release out that I had Tourette's. And I was like, that's the most offensive and ridiculous
What?
thing I've ever heard in my life.
What?
But I do want people to not view the way my body moves and think I have diminished mental capacity, or you know what I mean? So I will tend to say something funny early on in a discussion about being a Touretteer. And then I think I feel like the room relaxes. So if they have an issue or have a question, they can now ask it because I went there first. So I guess the challenge with that advice is not everybody wants to do that, and it should not be incumbent upon the person with something special about them to have to declare it or make others comfortable. So if you're a Labradorian personality like me, you're going to just say right off and tumble in. If you're not, you've got to seek out mentors and community and other people with differences. That is also a loaded concept, because I don't want to imply that everybody in every category of underrepresentation is all in the same boat. But if you're interviewing with a company and the HR person refers to an employee resource group for people on the spectrum or people of color or people that are veterans, there's a good chance that that's a company that's thinking more about all different kinds of people. So I think really just looking for cues and opportunities and ways to connect with other people that might not be the same as 85% of the other people out there is super crucial, because you need people to try things out on and ask questions of.
Yeah. And well, and I think that, you sharing your story and your background is inspiration for others. So
I hope so. Yeah. In fact, I gave a talk at MongoDB, and I think it was Autism Awareness Month, and I'm not autistic, but I had several people come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm on the spectrum. I'm going to tell my boss because I need special consideration to get XYZ done." And some guy came up to me, and this was awesome. He's like, "I've been blinking and sniffing, and I'm 40 years old, and I never knew what was wrong with me, and I'm going to go see if I have Tourette's on Tuesday." And I'm like, amazing. So you have to talk about it to make it easier for other people. And, I'm conscious of tokenizing, because as a PR person, I'm not just going to run up to, use the woman CTO to try to get ink for that fact if she's not interested in it. But if I am somebody that digs talking about it and is totally open and wants to help others, like, use me. Every company I've been in, I'm like, "Hey, Tourette, over here. You want to put me on CNN? Like, I got you."
yeah, that's awesome. All right. So what are apps you can't live without? And I always like to put the disclaimer in. It can't be Gmail, it can't be Slack, Calendar, because I would just get that over and over again. I'm like, no.
I feel ya. I mean, Audible. I am a voracious listener of books, not reader of. But I listen when I'm falling asleep, when I'm walking the dog, when I'm cleaning the kitchen, when I'm whatever. And I just read Sociopath, which is a really interesting memoir by a woman who is a diagnosed sociopath, who tells her journey, to destigmatize it and make people understand that it's actually not the same as psychopaths. So we should stop bundling them all together. And anyway, so Audible is a biggie. And I really like Curable. It's an app for chronic pain. And I have back pain, like, 60% of America. And they have all these, not just meditation, relaxation, mental focus things, but a lot of lectures and brain science and information. Like, the chronic pain game is so highly mental as opposed to just physical sensation, that this is an app for anybody that has any kind of chronic pain. And studies show that it alleviates some of your chronic pain just to understand the biomechanical feedback and all the aspects of it and the feelings and emotions and how your mental state affects pain. So that's a super cool one I like.
All right. What do you do for fun outside of work?
Oh my goodness. I am super obsessed with all this longevity stuff out here lately, because I'm 52. And apparently we're all supposed to be doing like millions of hours of zone 2 exercise a week now, as opposed to the high cardio stuff and eating all these funny things. So I will bake disgusting gluten-free, sugar-free, high fiber, proteiny cookies and cakes, and feed them to the family on weekends. And my husband has famously said that they taste like ashtrays. I think it's the buckwheat because I'm a heavy buckwheat user, but I will make something at least once a weekend, and it's usually horrifying. But I feel I'm a gambler. I'm like, one of these times it's going to hit.
Well, Steph, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through obviously all the great, experience and advice that you shared and obviously, continued success with multiplayer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I really loved it.